She was a virgin and swore she would never let a man come close and steal her innocence. But a mysterious millionaire appeared with an unusual request. I just want one night. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Emma Winters lived as if hiding from her own shadow. At 28, isolated in the apartment inherited from her grandmother in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina, she organized archives at the National Library and tended to a small suspended garden that bloomed with a beauty only she seemed to see. The apartment windows were always half closed, lace curtains filtering the Charleston light that insisted on entering. Her cell phone had remained on silent for months, and the mirrors in the house were covered with antique scarves that had belonged to her grandmother. Her presence in the world was discreet, almost ghostly, as if she were merely a passing shadow in other people's lives. Her skin had never been touched by male hands since childhood, when a sepulchral silence settled in her. Home after an event she preferred not to name, not to think about, not to remember. A fragmented memory, without a clear face but with the smell of cheap whiskey mixed with sweat, suffocating weight on her small body, and an emotional scar that spread throughout her existence like an ink stain spreading on fabric. From that cloudy September day when she was only 9 years old, Emma developed a profound aversion to any male physical approach, any intention of desire directed at her, any gaze that lingered too long on her body. Her body remained untouched, not out of moral purity or religiosity, but from a silent pact of emotional survival she had made with herself during a sleepless night at 15. During all these years, Emma lived among dusty books that smelled of the past, unread letters from her deceased mother kept in a shoebox under the bed, and the persistent echoes of a trauma she had never been able to fully verbalize, not even to the psychologist she had visited for 2 years in her adolescence. The few friendships she maintained, Bethany from the library, Mrs. Helen from the corner bakery, Melissa from the neighboring apartment, religiously respected her boundaries, even if they didn't understand their origin. Emma didn't allow prolonged hugs, didn't go out at night, didn't frequent very crowded places, avoided small elevators, and never ever accepted invitations that involved the presence of unknown men. She herself didn't fully understand all her fears. She merely obeyed the warning signs her body sent whenever a man got too close, spoke too loudly, gestured too much, or looked at her too directly. Her heart would race, her hands would sweat, her breathing would become short, and an inner voice would scream for her to flee, hide, disappear. It was stronger than she was, older than her adult consciousness. Her routine was mathematical and comforting, built over the years like an invisible armor against the outside world. She woke up at 6 o'clock sharp, prepared strong black coffee in an Italian coffee maker that had belonged to her mother, watered the plants in the suspended garden while listening to the slow awakening of the city below, took a quick shower, always wore discreet and neutral clothes, and walked down the historic district streets to catch the trolley. The journey to downtown took 40 minutes, and she took advantage of it to read, always with headphones to avoid unnecessary conversations with strangers. At the library, she spent 8 hours cataloging historical documents and rare books, work that required precision, patience, and a deep knowledge she had acquired over 6 years in the same position. During lunch, she ate alone in a discreet corner of the library cafeteria, always with an open book in front of her plate, usually some classic novel that transported her to times and places where her pain didn't exist, where women like her found happy endings despite everything. At the end of the day, she returned home by the same route, stopped at the bakery to buy fresh bread, prepared a simple dinner for one person, and spent her evenings reading, embroidering, or watching old movies on the small television in the living room until sleep naturally came around 10 o'clock. It was a small life, but it was hers, controlled, predictable, safe. No one bothered her, no one asked questions, no one invaded her space. Until one sunny afternoon in March, when Mardi Gras had already passed and the city was returning to its normal rhythm of work and traffic, her world was completely shaken by a millionaire donation to the library where she worked. The amount was astronomical by the institution's standards, $5 million, and came with a single requirement: that it be allocated exclusively for the preservation of ancient manuscripts and rare works, exactly the area in which Emma was the specialist and responsible. The donor's name was Daniel Fallon, and his signature on the official document had an almost aggressive elegance, with firm and decisive strokes that seemed to cut the paper. No one at the library knew him personally, but quick research revealed him to be a billionaire businessman, heir to a medical technology empire that extended throughout North America. At 42, he was described by the specialized press as a reclusive and enigmatic man, known for his sharp business intelligence, for his discreet philanthropy, and for a romantic history that included brief relationships with women who, according to the tabloids, never remained in his life for very long. Emma was designated by the director to personally coordinate the project financed by the donation, which meant that she would inevitably need to meet with the donor to discuss the details of how the money would be applied. The prospect left her deeply uncomfortable, with that familiar feeling of panic rising in her chest, but she couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. It was the most important professional opportunity of her career, and refusing would be impossible. To explain without revealing aspects of her life that she preferred to keep buried forever. The first time Emma saw Daniel Fallon was on a rainy Thursday in April. He arrived at the library unannounced, accompanied only by a driver who remained outside next to the black car with dark windows. Emma was organizing 18th century manuscripts when the director came to get her, visibly nervous, saying that the donor had appeared in person and wanted to meet her. Emma's heart immediately raced, that familiar feeling of panic rising in her chest like a hot and suffocating wave. Daniel was exactly as she had imagined, and completely different at the same time. Tall, he must have been at least 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled the dark suit of impeccable cut. His hair was black with some grey strands at the temples, combed back with almost military precision. But it was his eyes that impressed her most, grey like melted lead, intense and penetrating, but carrying a melancholy that she immediately recognized. It was the look of someone who also carried invisible wounds. When he extended his hand to greet her, Emma felt her entire body stiffen. She managed to accept the handshake for less than 3 seconds, enough time to notice that his hands were large, warm, and surprisingly soft, with only a few small scars on the knuckles. He didn't comment on her obvious reaction of discomfort, didn't insist on contact, didn't ask questions. He simply withdrew his hand and maintained a respectful distance, as if he intuitively knew that she needed space. During the meeting, which lasted almost 2 hours, Daniel showed himself to be extremely knowledgeable about the preservation of historical documents, speaking with authority about restoration techniques, humidity control, digitization, and cataloging. Emma was surprised by his level of knowledge, but even more surprised by his voice, deep, measured, almost hypnotic. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, and had the habit of taking long pauses before answering questions, as if he was always pondering far beyond what was asked. What intrigued her most was the way he observed her. It wasn't the invasive and uncomfortable gaze she was used to receiving from other men, the one that made her feel stripped and vulnerable. It was an attentive but respectful look, as if he were trying to decipher a complicated puzzle without rushing to reach the solution. At times, Emma had the strange impression that he could see through her carefully constructed defenses, see the wounded woman who hid behind the competent professional. At the end of the meeting, when they had already defined the basic details of the project, Daniel did something unexpected. He took from the inside pocket of his jacket an old book, small and bound in worn brown leather. It was a first edition of The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne from 1850 in an impressive state of preservation. Emma immediately recognized the value of the work, not just financial, but historical and cultural. "I would like you to have this book," he said, carefully placing it on the table between them. "Not as part of the official donation, but as a personal gift. I know you appreciate Hawthorne. I saw you reading The House of the Seven Gables during your coffee break." Emma was disturbed. He had been observing her without her noticing, which should have frightened her, but for some reason it didn't. There was something in the way he said this, without malice, just as a kind observation. "I can't accept it," she automatically responded, backing slightly in her chair. "It's too valuable, and I barely know you." Daniel smiled for the first time since he had arrived, a small and melancholy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's exactly why you should have it. People who know the true value of things are the only ones who should possess them." He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and added, "Think of the book as a bridge between what was lost and what can still be found." Before leaving, he left a business card on the table next to the book. It was a simple card, just with his name, a phone number, and an address in the battery. "If you need anything for the project, or if you simply want to return the book, you can call me any time." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "Any time, Emma, day or night." There was something in the way he pronounced her name that made her feel a strange shiver, different from her usual fear. It was almost as if he were pronouncing a sacred word. After he left, Emma remained alone in the meeting room for almost 20 minutes, looking alternately at the book and at the card. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. It was a new sensation, indefinable, as if something inside her had moved after years of complete immobility. For the first time in a long time, she felt genuinely curious about another person. Who was Daniel Fallon really? Why would a man with all that wealth and power be interested in ancient manuscripts and a withdrawn librarian like her? That night at home, Emma spent hours leafing through Hawthorne's book. The pages were in perfect condition. The paper had that characteristic smell of well-preserved old books, and she discovered several handwritten annotations in the margins. An elegant and masculine handwriting, obviously old, perhaps from the original owner of the work. The annotations were insightful about the characters and narrative, revealing a cultured and sensitive mind. But what intrigued her most was a dedication on the first page, written with more recent blue ink. "For someone who understands that some stories can only be told slowly, with patience and respect for what has been broken, D.F." Emma read and reread those words dozens of times, trying to decipher what they really meant. Was it a message for her? How could he know about her wounds, about her need for time and care? For the first time in years, Emma fell asleep thinking about a man, not with fear or anxiety, but with a dangerous curiosity that she didn't know whether she should nurture or suffocate before it grew too big to be controlled. During the following 2 weeks, Emma tried to return to her normal routine, but discovered that this had become impossible. Hawthorne's book remained on her bedside table, and she found herself looking at it several times a day, remembering Daniel's deep voice, the respectful way he had kept his distance, the melancholy look that seemed to hide untold stories. For the first time in years, her mind was occupied with thoughts about a man that didn't involve fear or repulsion. At the library, Emma became more distracted. She made small cataloguing errors, forgot to eat at lunchtime, and found herself looking out the window wondering if she would see the black car parked on the street again. Bethany, her only true friend at work, noticed the change and made comments about how Emma seemed different lately, more thoughtful, less present. Emma denied any change, but she knew she was lying to herself. Daniel's second visit happened on a Tuesday without rain. Emma was alone in the historical archive when she heard firm steps in the corridor. She immediately recognized the sound, long determined strides of someone accustomed to command. Her heart began to beat faster, but this time it wasn't just anxiety. It was expectation mixed with nervousness, as if she were a teenager waiting for someone special. He appeared at the door of the archive, carrying a brown leather folder and a more serious expression than the first time. He wore a dark grey suit without a tie, with the white shirt open at the first button, and Emma noticed a small scar on his neck that she hadn't noticed before. "Good afternoon, Emma," he said, and again that respectful, almost reverent tone with which he pronounced her name. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "No, it's fine," she responded, surprised by her own voice, which came out firmer than she expected. "Did you need to talk to me about the project?" Daniel entered the archive, closed the door behind him, and placed the folder on one of the consultation tables. "Actually, no. I came to return a visit. You didn't call to thank me for the book, and I confess I was worried that I might have cause some inconvenience. Emma felt her face heat up. It was true she should have called, it was the polite thing to do, but the idea of talking to him on the phone made her too nervous. "I'm sorry, I'm not very good with phones, but I love the book, it's really a rare piece." Daniel smiled in that melancholy way that was beginning to become familiar. "I figured as much. That's why I decided to come in person." He approached slowly, but stopped at a safe distance, as if he had an internal radar for her boundaries. "May I ask what you thought of the annotations?" Emma hesitated before answering. "They're very insightful. Whoever made them had a deep understanding of the work." "They were my grandfather's," said Daniel, opening the folder and taking out some papers. He was a literature professor before building the family empire. He said Hawthorne was the only American writer who truly understood the human soul, especially its darkest parts. Emma was intrigued. "And do you agree with him?" Daniel took a long pause, that habit she had already noticed, as if he always pondered deeply before answering any personal question. "I believe that some people carry shadows that are larger than themselves, and that sometimes it takes finding someone who isn't afraid of those shadows to be able to live with them." There was something in the way he said this that made Emma feel he wasn't just talking about literature. It was as if he were revealing something about himself in an indirect and careful way. "I brought a proposal," he continued, slightly changing his tone. "I would like to invite you to dinner, not at a restaurant but at my home. I promise it will just be a conversation between two people who appreciate books and well-told stories." The invitation caught Emma completely by surprise. Her first instinct was to refuse immediately, as she always did, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the way he had formulated the invitation, without pressure, almost as if he were offering an opportunity, not making a demand. Or perhaps it was the curiosity that had been growing inside her for weeks, stronger than her usual fear. "Why me?" she asked, surprising herself with the direct question. Daniel looked into her eyes in that intense but not invasive way. "Because you're the first person in a very long time who looks at me and doesn't just see what I have but who I am, and because I suspect that we both understand what it is to live carefully, keeping a distance from things that can hurt us." Emma felt a lump in her throat. He had verbalized something that she had never been able to express about herself. "And if I say no? Then I will respect your decision and won't insist. But if you say yes, I can guarantee that it will be a night different from any you've ever had. Not better or worse, just different." Emma's response surprised even herself. "What kind of dinner?" Daniel smiled, this time a smile that reached his eyes. "The kind that happens slowly, with conversations that matter without rush to finish. The kind where you can leave at any moment without explanations if you don't feel comfortable. The kind where no one touches anyone without explicit permission." Emma remained silent for almost a full minute, her heart beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it. All her life experience screamed for her to refuse, to keep her defenses up, to not risk her carefully constructed emotional safety. But there was something stronger screaming too, the desire to know who this man really was, the curiosity about what he had meant about living carefully, the need to understand why his presence didn't frighten her as it should. "When?" she asked, hardly believing her own words. "Saturday night, if you'd like. At 8 o'clock I can send a car to pick you up, or you can come on your own, if you prefer to maintain control of the situation." Emma thought quickly. Having her own means of transportation meant being able to leave when she wanted without depending on anyone. "I'll come in my own car." Daniel nodded, as if approving the decision. He wrote an address on a piece of paper and handed it to her. "It's a house in the Battery, close to the sea. If you change your mind, you don't need to explain anything. Just don't show up and I'll understand." He paused, looking at her with that controlled intensity. "But I hope you don't change your mind, Emma. I have the feeling that you also need a different night." After he left, Emma remained alone in the archive, holding the paper with the address and trying to understand what had just happened. She, who hadn't gone out at night for years, who avoided unknown men, who had built her entire life around predictability and safety, had just accepted an invitation to dinner at the house of a man she barely knew. It was crazy, it was dangerous. It was completely out of character. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly alive. Saturday arrived faster than Emma expected. She spent the previous 3 days alternating between nervous expectation and the impulse to cancel everything. She picked up the phone several times to call and make up an excuse, but always gave up at the last second. There was something about this opportunity that she knew she shouldn't waste, even if she couldn't define exactly what. On Friday night, Emma did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the mall to buy a new outfit. She didn't want anything too flashy or revealing, but she also didn't want to look sloppy. After 2 hours of searching, she chose a navy blue dress with 3/4 sleeves, elegant but discreet, that highlighted her silhouette without being provocative. She also bought a comfortable low sandal. If she needed to run away, at least she could. On Saturday, Emma woke up with a mix of nervousness and determination that she hadn't felt in a long time. She spent the day trying to keep busy, cleaning the apartment, watering the plants, organizing books that were already organized. In the afternoon, she took a long bath, washed her hair with extra care, and applied light makeup, just a bit of mascara and nude lipstick. She wanted to look well-groomed, but still herself. At 7:30 in the evening, Emma was in the car, driving along the Battery Promenade toward the address Daniel had given. The traffic was light for a Saturday, and she took the opportunity to try to calm her nerves, breathing deeply and reminding herself that she could leave at any moment if she didn't feel comfortable. This certainty was her safety anchor. Daniel's house was a modern 3-story home with a facade of glass and exposed concrete, located on a tree-lined and quiet street just a block from the waterfront. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was clearly expensive, with a well-maintained garden in front and subtle lighting that created a welcoming atmosphere. Emma parked on the street and stayed in the car for a few minutes, observing the house and trying to gather courage to ring the doorbell. When she finally got out of the car, Emma noticed that her legs were slightly shaky. It wasn't exactly fear, but a mixture of anxiety and expectation that she didn't know how to process. She rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching from the inside. When the door opened, Daniel appeared wearing a white linen shirt and dark pants, barefoot. There was something intimate and casual about this choice that left her momentarily speechless. "Emma," he said, smiling warmly, "I'm glad you came. Please come in." His voice sounded different at home, more relaxed, less formal than at the library. Emma entered and was immediately hit by the aroma of the house, something between wood, books, and a subtle masculine perfume. The interior was surprisingly cozy for someone of his financial status. Walls with books from floor to ceiling, dark wooden furniture, well-worn leather armchairs, paintings that seemed to have been chosen for personal taste, not commercial value. "Your house is beautiful," said Emma, genuinely impressed. "It's not what I expected." Daniel chuckled softly, a pleasant sound she hadn't heard before. "What did you expect? Something more cold, more impersonal, like corporate offices." "That's my public face," he explained, guiding her through the living room. "Here is where I really live, where I can be who I am, not who the world expects me to be." Daniel led her to a small and intimate dining room with a round table set for 2 people, lit candles, and simple flowers in the center. The table was set with discreet elegance, white porcelain plates, crystal glasses, antique cutlery that seemed to have history. "I hope you like Italian food," he said. "I cooked personally, nothing too elaborate, but made with care." Emma was surprised. "You cook?" "It's a form of meditation for me. When I need to think about something important, I go to the kitchen. The repetitive movement, the necessary concentration, the care with details. It's therapeutic." He pulled out the chair for her to sit, a chivalrous gesture she didn't expect. "Today I made a mushroom risotto and a simple salad, nothing that could cause discomfort if you decide to leave early." During dinner, they talked about books, art, music, travel. Daniel was a fascinating conversationalist with deep knowledge about various subjects, but he always asked about Emma's opinions, genuinely interested in what she thought. He had the rare gift of asking questions that made her talk more than she usually did, revealing aspects of her personality that she rarely shared with other people. "May I ask a personal question?" he said, when they were finishing the risotto. Emma stiffened slightly but nodded. "Why does an intelligent and beautiful woman like you live so alone? I'm not judging, just curious. I recognize the signs of someone who chooses solitude as protection." The question was direct, but made with such care that Emma didn't feel invaded. "It's a long story," she responded. "And you? Why does a man with everything you have also live alone?" Daniel took a long pause, slowly turning the glass of red wine between his fingers. "Because I've hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. And because I discovered it's easier to live with my own demons than risk unleashing them on someone else." There was a deep pain in his voice when he said this, a vulnerability that Emma immediately recognized. "What kind of demons?" she asked, surprising herself with her own courage. Daniel looked directly into her eyes, and Emma saw there an ancient sadness, the kind that leaves permanent marks on the soul, the kind that makes you not trust yourself to love someone without destroying them, the kind that comes from a childhood where love was confused with control and care was confused with possession. Emma felt a shiver of recognition. There was something in the way he talked about not trusting himself that echoed her own fears. "And why did you invite me then? If you're afraid of hurting people?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Because you're the first person I've met who seems to understand that closeness doesn't have to mean danger, and because I have the feeling that we both know what it's like to live behind invisible walls." When they finished dinner, Daniel suggested they go to the living room where he had prepared coffee and put a playlist of classical music playing softly. He sat in an armchair and gestured for Emma to choose where she wanted to sit. There was another armchair, a small sofa, several options that maintained a safe distance. Emma chose one end of the sofa, not too close but also not too far away. "May I confess something?" said Daniel after a comfortable silence. "It's been years since I had a real conversation with someone. Most people either want something from me or are afraid of me or are trying to impress me. You're the first who simply is here, present, real." Emma felt touched by this confession. "Maybe it's because I don't have anything to lose or gain from this either. I'm here because I wanted to be." "Why did you want to?" His question was soft, without pressure, but Emma realized it was important for him to know the answer. She thought carefully before responding. "Because you don't try to touch me, because you respect my space, because when you look at me I don't see desire or possession in your eyes. I see recognition, as if you see something in me that other people don't see." Daniel nodded slowly. Recognition. That's a perfect word to describe it. He leaned slightly forward but still maintaining distance. "Emma, may I ask for something? You don't have to accept, and if you say no, I won't insist." Emma felt her heart speed up, but gestured for him to continue. "I would like for you to stay tonight. Not to do anything, just to not be alone. For it's been so long since I've slept knowing there's someone close by, someone I trust." The proposal should have frightened her, but it didn't. There was something in his vulnerability, in the way he had made the request, that touched her deeply. It was a powerful man asking for company like a child afraid of the dark. "Would we stay in separate rooms?" she asked. "Of course. You can choose any of the guest rooms. They all have locks on the inside." Emma remained silent for several minutes, her heart beating strongly as she pondered a decision that could change something fundamental in her life. Finally, she looked at him and said, "All right, I'll stay." Emma woke up the next morning with a strange sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in years. The guest room where she had slept was cozy and quiet, with windows that overlooked the back garden of the house. She had slept deeply, without the usual nightmares, without waking up startled in the middle of the night. There was something in the atmosphere of that house, or perhaps in Daniel's respectful presence in the room next door, that made her feel genuinely safe. During breakfast, which he prepared with the same careful attention as dinner. Fresh, French bread, cut fruit, strong coffee. They talked about the previous night. "How did you sleep?" he asked, serving fresh orange juice in glass cups. "Surprisingly well," admitted Emma. "I didn't expect to be able to relax in an unfamiliar house." Daniel smiled in that melancholy way that she was beginning to adore. "Maybe it's because you realize there's no danger here. Just two people trying to understand how it's possible not to be alone without feeling invaded." In the days that followed that night, Emma discovered that she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It hadn't been anything dramatic or cinematic, just two people sharing space, conversations, and a type of intimacy that didn't involve physical touch. But it had been deeply transformative in a way that she couldn't explain. For the first time in her adult life, she had spent the night in the presence of a man without fear, without anxiety, without the constant need to be alert. Daniel began to appear at the library more frequently, always with some excuse related to the donation project, but Emma realized that the visits were more than professional. They developed a particular way of conversing. Long pauses, meaningful looks, careful questions that revealed layers of personality little by little. It was as if they were learning a new language, a form of intimacy that didn't follow the conventional rules of approach between a man and a woman. During one of these visits, Daniel brought an unusual proposal. "I'd like to show you something," he said, after discussing technical details about the digitization of manuscripts. "But it's at my house, and it would involve you trusting me in a different way." Emma felt that familiar mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What kind of trust?" "The kind that involves you allowing me to blindfold you and guide you through a sensory experience. Nothing sexual, nothing invasive, just different." The proposal should have sounded absurd, even dangerous. But coming from Daniel, it sounded like an invitation to a carefully controlled adventure. "Why?" she asked. "Because I believe you've spent so many years using vision to protect yourself, always alert to potential threats, that you've forgotten to use your other senses to simply feel the world. And because I want to give you an experience where you can completely trust another person without losing control." Emma remained silent for several minutes, processing the proposal. There was something in the idea that both attracted and terrified her at the same time. "If I tell you to stop at any moment, will you stop?" "Immediately," he responded without hesitation. "If you want to remove the blindfold, you can remove it. If you want to leave, you can leave. You maintain all control of the situation. You just choose to experience it differently." That night, Emma found herself once again at Daniel's house, but this time with her heart beating for completely different reasons. He welcomed her with the same gentleness as always, offered wine which she refused. She wanted to be completely aware of everything, and then brought a black silk band. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. Emma nodded, surprising herself with her own determination. Daniel placed the blindfold with extreme care, making sure it wasn't too tight, that she could breathe comfortably. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice sounding closer without the visual distraction. "Strange," admitted Emma, "but not scared." "Good. Now give me your hand." Emma hesitated only a second before extending her hand. When he touched her, it was with a gentleness she didn't expect, warm and firm fingers, but without pressure, without possessiveness. Daniel guided her slowly through the house, narrating each step. 3 steps down, now a corridor. We're going to turn left." Emma discovered that without vision she became much more aware of other details, the smell of wood and books, the sound of her own footsteps on the floor, the temperature of the air changing as they passed through different environments. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To a place where you can simply feel without analyzing," he responded. They stopped in an environment that Emma didn't recognize by the sounds. Daniel carefully released her hand. "I'm going to play piano for you," he said. "Just that. You can sit wherever you want, you can walk if you prefer, you can remove the blindfold if you feel uncomfortable. But I would like you to try to just listen without thinking about anything else." Emma heard the sound of him moving away, a chair being adjusted, and then the first notes of a melody she didn't recognize, but which was intensely beautiful and melancholy. The music Daniel played was complex and emotional, alternating between soft passages and more intense moments. Emma realized that without being able to see him, she heard the music in a completely different way. Each note seemed to carry emotional weight, tell a story. She moved slowly through the environment, trying to understand where she was by the sounds and acoustics. It seemed to be a spacious room with a subtle echo that suggested a high ceiling. When the music stopped, Emma remained silent for a long moment. "How do you feel?" asked Daniel, his voice coming from a direction she didn't expect. "Different," she responded honestly. "As if I had heard music for the first time, truly." That was the idea. Sometimes we need to remove one layer of perception to intensify the others. "May I remove the blindfold now?" asked Emma. "Of course." She removed the silk band and blinked several times until adjusting to the soft light of the environment. She was in a room she hadn't seen before, with a black grand piano in the center, walls covered with books, and some armchairs arranged to create small, intimate spaces. It was a room designed for experiences like that: music, contemplation, deep conversation. Daniel was sitting at the piano, observing her with that attentive expression she already knew well. "What did you feel?" he asked. Emma thought carefully before answering. "I felt that I can trust you in a way I never thought possible, and I felt that there are parts of me that have been asleep for a very long time." "And how is that feeling?" "Scary and liberating at the same time." Daniel rose from the piano and approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. "Emma, may I tell you something about myself? Something I've never told." "Anyone?" She nodded, intrigued. "I've spent the last 15 years believing I was dangerous to the people I loved, that my presence in someone's life would inevitably cause pain. But with you, for the first time, I feel I can be close to someone without destroying them." Emma felt something move inside her chest, an emotion she couldn't name. "Why am I different?" "Because you don't want anything from me besides my real presence, because you're not afraid of my silences, my pauses, my need to go slowly. And because when I look at you, I don't see someone who needs to be fixed or possessed. I see someone who, like me, is learning that intimacy can exist without invasion." That night, for the second time, Emma slept at Daniel's house. But this time she realized that something fundamental had changed. It was no longer just about not being alone or about feeling safe. It was about discovering that she could trust not only him, but herself. That she could make choices based on desire, not just fear, and that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to discover what was on the other side of the wall she had built around her own heart. The following weeks brought a new and unexpected routine for Emma. She and Daniel began to meet regularly, always, at his house, always following that careful and respectful rhythm they had instinctively established. There was no rush, no pressure, no expectations beyond mutual company. It was as if they were building an entirely new form of relationship, based on gradual trust and slow discovery. During these meetings, Daniel continued creating sensory experiences for Emma. One night, he prepared a dinner where she ate blindfolded, discovering flavors she had never noticed when she could see the food. Another time, he took her to the back garden of the house and asked her to identify different plants only by touch and scent. They were trust exercises disguised as games, ways for her to learn that she could surrender to new experiences without losing control. But it was during one of these nights that something unexpected happened. Emma was resting on the sofa in the music room, listening to Daniel play a particularly melancholy piece, when she realized she wasn't just relaxed in his presence, she was genuinely attracted to him. It wasn't just the emotional security he provided, or the intellectual curiosity he awakened. It was something more primitive, more physical, that she had suppressed for so long that she almost didn't recognize it when it finally emerged. The realization left her deeply disturbed. Emma had spent so long believing that this part of her was dead, that she would never be capable of feeling desire for a man again, that when it finally happened, she didn't know how to process it. That night, she left earlier, claiming a headache. But in reality, she needed time to understand what was happening with her own body. For the next 3 days, Emma avoided Daniel. She didn't return his calls, made up excuses not to be at the library when he appeared, and spent hours trying to rationalize what she had felt. But the more she thought, the more confused she became. How could she feel desire for someone who represented exactly the type of danger she had spent her entire life running from? How could she want the physical proximity of a man when male touch had always been synonymous with terror for her? Daniel didn't give up. On Thursday, he appeared at her apartment in the historic district, carrying a shopping bag and a determined expression. "I know you're avoiding me," he said when Emma opened the door, visibly surprised and uncomfortable. "And I know something changed during our last night together. May I come in? I brought ingredients to cook for you since you always come to my house." Emma hesitated but eventually allowed him to enter. She watched as Daniel examined her small kitchen and began preparing a simple pasta, moving with the same careful precision she had learned to associate with everything he did. "You don't need to cook for me," she said, still tense. "I know," he responded, without stopping cutting tomatoes. "But I want to do this, and I want us to talk about what's making you uncomfortable." During dinner, which transpired in tense silence, Emma finally gathered courage to verbalize her fears. "I'm confused about what I feel for you," she admitted, nervously playing with the food on her plate. "I thought I would never be capable of feeling certain things again. And now that I'm feeling them, I don't know what to do with it." Daniel stopped eating and looked at her directly. "What kind of things?" The question was soft, but Emma realized he already knew the answer. "Physical attraction," she said, feeling her face heat up. "Desire, things I thought were dead in me." Daniel remained silent for a long moment, processing the confession. "And that scares you?" "It terrifies me," admitted Emma, "because I don't know how to differentiate between healthy desire and what happened to me before. I don't know how to trust what I feel." Daniel slowly stood up and approached her, but stopped before invading her personal space. "Emma, may I tell you something? I also feel attraction to you, since the first time I saw you. But I've learned that attraction doesn't need to mean immediate action, that desire can exist without pressure, that it's possible to want someone and still completely respect that person's boundaries." Emma looked at him, trying to process the words. "How do you manage that? How do you control it?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Because I've been on the other side. I've been the man who couldn't separate desire from possession, who confused passion with property rights, and I've seen the damage that can cause. I've learned that true love, if that's what we're discovering here, means wanting the other person's well-being more than your own satisfaction." "Is that what we're discovering? Love?" The question came out more vulnerable than Emma intended. Daniel knelt beside her chair, maintaining distance, but placing himself in a less intimidating position. "I don't know yet, but I know I've never cared so much about another person's well-being. I know your happiness has become more important to me than anything I might want from you. And I know that, if you never want to go beyond what we already have, I would be happy to spend the rest of my life just talking with you and hearing you play piano." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. "Do you really mean that?" "Every word," he responded, extending his hand but without touching her. "You've changed something fundamental in me, Emma. You've taught me that intimacy can exist without invasion, that closeness doesn't need to mean loss of identity, that love can be built slowly, with care and mutual respect." At that moment, Emma did something that surprised her more than anything she had done in the past weeks. She extended her hand and touched Daniel's face, feeling for the first time the texture of his skin, the shape of his jaw, the lightness of the grey strands at his temples. He remained completely still, letting her explore his face at her own pace without returning the touch until she gave permission. "It's strange," murmured Emma, passing her fingers slowly over his forehead, his eyebrows, the line of his nose. "I touch you and don't feel fear. I feel curiosity, a desire to know you through touch as well." Daniel closed his eyes, clearly moved by the gesture. "How does that make you feel?" he asked, voice slightly hoarse. Powerful, responded Emma, surprising herself, as if I were choosing for the first time in my life how I want to relate to a man. They stayed like this for several minutes, Emma carefully exploring Daniel's face while he remained perfectly still, allowing her to take all the initiative. It was a moment of deep intimacy, but completely safe where she had all the control. When Emma finally withdrew her hand, Daniel opened his eyes, and she saw in them a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, we continue discovering at your pace," he responded. "There's no pressure, no timeline, no expectations beyond mutual honesty. If you want to go slower, we go slower. If you want to stop here, we stop. If you want to explore more, we explore. The choice is always yours." Emma felt something settle inside her chest, a feeling of security and possibility that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, she was in a relationship where she didn't need to defend herself, where she could simply be and discover who she was capable of becoming when she didn't live in constant fear. "I want to explore more," she said, looking directly into his eyes, but slowly, carefully, with the certainty that I can change my mind at any moment without explanations. Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do. Slowly, carefully, with all the respect in the world for what you're offering." That night, Emma slept in her own bed, but for the first time in years she dreamed of possibilities instead of nightmares. She dreamed of a future where intimacy was a choice, not an imposition, where desire was a shared discovery, not a threat to be avoided. And when she woke up the next morning, instead of her usual fear, she felt curiosity about what the new day might bring. In the weeks that followed that transformative night, Emma and Daniel developed their own language of intimacy that defied all traditional relationship conventions. They met almost daily, alternating between his house and her apartment, but always respecting the careful rituals they had established. It was as if they were rewriting the rules of what it meant to be in a relationship with someone, creating something completely new and unique to them. Emma discovered that she could initiate physical contact when she wanted, at the pace she felt comfortable with, without ever feeling pressured to go beyond what she desired. Daniel had infinite patience, a capacity to be present without being invasive that she had never found in another person. He let her explore her natural curiosity about touch and proximity, always following the signals she gave, never anticipating or assuming he could go beyond what she offered. But it was when Emma began to feel truly safe that the problems began to appear. On a Tuesday morning, while organizing old correspondence from her mother that she had kept in a box for years, without having the courage to read, she discovered letters that completely changed her perspective on her own past. They were letters that her mother had written but never sent, addressed to her full of apologies and revelations that Emma had never imagined. In one of the letters, dated a few months before her mother's death, Emma read, "My dear daughter, I know you will never forgive me for having remained silent when I should have protected you. I knew what your stepfather was doing. I saw the signs, I heard you cry in your room after those horrible nights. But I chose silence because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of not being able to support you without him. I was a coward, and you paid the price for my cowardice. I hope that one day you find someone who truly loves you, someone who protects you as I should have done." Emma read the letter 3 times before the words really penetrated her consciousness. Her mother knew. During all those terrible years of childhood, her mother knew what was happening and chose to do nothing. The revelation was like receiving a punch to the stomach, taking all the air from her lungs. She had spent decades blaming herself for the silence, thinking she should have spoken up, should have asked for help, and now she discovered that even if she had spoken, it might not have made a difference. When Daniel arrived at her apartment, that night, he found Emma sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered letters, crying silently. He didn't ask immediate questions, just sat on the floor beside her, respecting her space but offering his presence. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked softly, after several minutes of silence. Emma simply handed him one of the letters, unable to verbalize what she had discovered. Daniel read the letter in silence, and Emma saw his expression progressively harden. When he finished, he carefully placed the letter on the floor and looked at her with a mixture of pain and anger she had never seen before. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he said, voice low and controlled. "I'm sorry that you suffered through this, and I'm sorry that the person who should have protected you failed so completely." "I don't know how to process this," murmured Emma, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "For years I thought the problem was mine, that I should have been braver, stronger. Now I discover that even if I had spoken—" "The problem was never yours," interrupted Daniel, firmly, but without raising his voice. "You were a child. The responsibility to protect you was with the adults around you, and they failed. This is not your fault, it never was." Emma looked at him through her tears. "How can you be so sure?" Daniel remained silent for a long moment, and Emma realized he was struggling with some internal decision. Finally, he said, "Because I've been on the other side of this situation. Because I've been the man who caused pain to someone who didn't deserve it, and I know the difference between real responsibility and guilt that is unjustly imposed on us." The confession caught Emma by surprise. "What do you mean?" Daniel moved slightly, as if preparing to tell something difficult. 15 years ago, I was in a relationship with a woman named Caroline. She was fragile, emotionally vulnerable, had suffered abuse in childhood just like you. I thought I could save her, fix her, but in reality I was repeating patterns of control that I had learned in my own family. Emma felt a shiver of apprehension. What happened? I was possessive, controlling, emotionally manipulative. I thought I was being protective, but I was being destructive. Caroline became increasingly dependent, more fragile, more isolated. I was destroying her in the name of love. Daniel paused, breathing deeply. One day, after a particularly bad episode where I forbade her from seeing her own friends because I thought they were a bad influence, she tried to kill herself. Emma felt her heart stop. "Tried." "Succeeded," said Daniel, voice almost inaudible. "She took an overdose of medication on a night when I was traveling for work. She left a note saying she couldn't bear to live in the emotional prison I had created for her anymore. She said she preferred to die than continue being a broken doll in my collection of things I thought I could fix." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma processed the revelation slowly, trying to reconcile the careful and respectful man she knew with the story he had just told. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because you deserve to know who I really am. Because if we're going to continue building something together, you need to know that I have the potential to be dangerous to people I love. And because I want you to understand why I am so careful with you, why I go so slowly." Emma remained silent for several minutes, looking at the letters scattered on the floor, then at Daniel, trying to understand how she felt about this revelation. "Do you think you could do the same thing to me?" she asked. "I don't know," he responded honestly. "I hope not. I've been in therapy for 15 years working to understand and change these patterns. But I can't guarantee that I won't make the same mistakes. I can only promise that I will fight against them every day." Emma was surprised by her own reaction. Instead of fear or repulsion, she felt something more complex, a strange form of connection to his pain, an understanding that they both carried scars in different ways. "Do you feel you're repeating patterns with me?" "No," he said immediately. "With you, it's different. You teach me every day that intimacy can exist without control, that love can be built in freedom, not in dependency. But still, you deserve to know who I was to decide if you can trust who I am trying to be." Emma looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, looking for signs of manipulation or dishonesty, but all she saw was genuine vulnerability, fear of losing something precious, and the same kind of courage she was learning to have, the courage to be honest about old wounds, even at the risk of being rejected. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said. "I know it wasn't easy." "And you?" asked Daniel. "How do you feel knowing this?" Emma thought carefully before answering. "Scared. but not in the way I would expect. Scared that this might change something between us, but not scared of you. Because the man who told me this story is not the same one who made those mistakes, and because I know that someone who lied to manipulate me wouldn't tell such a compromising truth about himself. Daniel seemed relieved, but still cautious. What does this mean for us? Emma looked around the room at her mother's letters, at Daniel, and finally at her own hands. It means that we both have complicated pasts, wounds that are still healing, fears that we're still learning to face, and maybe that makes us more compatible, not less. She paused, breathing deeply. It also means that we need to be even more careful with each other, even more honest about our boundaries and needs. That night they didn't sleep together. Daniel left after helping her put away her mother's letters, giving her space to process everything that had been revealed. But before leaving, he said something that Emma would carry with her for the following days. Emma, you're the first person who makes me want to be better than I was, not because you need me fixed, but because you deserve someone who is always striving to be worthy of what you offer. Alone in her apartment, Emma spent the night awake not because of nightmares, but thinking about forgiveness, about second chances, about the difference between accepting someone despite their mistakes and accepting someone because their mistakes made them more human, more aware, more determined to do better. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where both she and Daniel could find healing for their old wounds, not despite each other, but through each other. The days following Daniel's revelation were tense and charged with a different energy between them. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the story he had told, the courage it must have cost to confess something so compromising, the way this revelation changed her perception of him. It didn't make him more dangerous in her eyes, curiously. It made him more human, more real, someone who had made terrible mistakes and was genuinely trying to be better. For an entire week, they met only at the library, maintaining strictly professional conversations about the donation project. Emma realized that Daniel was giving her space to process everything, respecting her need for time as he always did. But she also noticed that he seemed more tense, more careful, as if he were constantly policing himself to not cross invisible lines. It was on a rainy Thursday that Emma made a decision that surprised her. After work, instead of going home, she drove to Daniel's house in the Battery. When she rang the doorbell, he opened the door, clearly surprised to see her. "Emma, are you okay?" "May I come in?" she asked, noticing that her own voice sounded more determined than she felt. "We need to talk." Daniel led her to the familiar living room, the one with the leather armchairs and the shelves full of books. He offered coffee, tea, anything, but Emma refused everything. She wanted to have this conversation with a completely clear mind. "I spent the week thinking about what you told me," she began, sitting on the edge of an armchair. "And I've reached some conclusions that I need to share with you." Daniel sat in the opposite armchair, maintaining a respectful distance, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were slightly clenched. "I'm listening," he said. Emma took a deep breath before beginning. "First, thank you for being honest with me. I know it must have been one of the hardest things you've ever done, and I know you took a real risk of losing me by telling that story." "There was no choice," Daniel responded softly. "You deserved to know." "Second," continued Emma, "I want you to understand that your story doesn't make me afraid of you. It makes me admire you more, actually, because the man I've known, the man who has been so careful and respectful with me, is someone who has learned from his mistakes in a way that few men can." Daniel seemed genuinely surprised. "You're not afraid?" "Not in the way you imagine. I'm afraid of other things." Emma paused, gathering courage for the hardest part of the conversation. "I'm afraid I'm falling in love with you and don't know how to handle it. I'm afraid that my past will prevent me from being the woman you deserve. And I'm afraid that our story will end like Caroline's. Not because you will hurt me, but because I won't be able to accept true love when it's offered." The silence that followed was dense and charged. Daniel looked at her with an intensity she had never seen before, as if he were trying to read between the lines of everything she had said. "Emma," he finally said, voice hoarse with emotion, "are you saying that—" "I'm saying that I love you," she interrupted, surprising herself with the clarity of the declaration. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know it's true. And I know that it terrifies me more than anything I've ever felt in my life." She got up from the armchair, beginning to walk around the room. "You taught me that intimacy can be safe, that closeness doesn't have to mean loss of identity, that I can trust someone without losing myself in the process. But now that I've reached this point, I don't know what to do with these feelings." Daniel stood up too, but remained where he was. "What are you afraid will happen?" Emma stopped walking and faced him directly. "I'm afraid that now that I've admitted I love you, you'll change. I'm afraid that this will awaken the controlling side you described. I'm afraid that I'll become dependent on you the way Caroline became, and that this will destroy everything we've built together." "What if I tell you I have exactly the same fears?" said Daniel, taking a step toward her. "What if I tell you that I love you too, but that I wake up every day afraid of being subtly too possessive, subtly too controlling, subtly too manipulative? What if I tell you that I spend nights awake, analyzing every conversation of ours, every gesture of mine, looking for signs that I'm repeating old patterns?" Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. "How do we do this then? How do we love each other without destroying each other?" Daniel finally approached, stopping a few inches from her. "We do exactly what we're doing now. We talk about our fears. We're honest about our patterns. We watch each other and allow ourselves to be watched. And we build something new based on everything we've learned about what doesn't work." "Do you really think it's possible?" Emma asked, looking into his eyes. "I think we have to try," he responded, "because the alternative is to live forever, afraid of our own feelings, and that's not really living." Daniel extended his hand, palm up, offering contact but leaving the choice completely with her. "Emma, do you want to try to build something real with me, knowing that it will be difficult, that we'll have to be vigilant about our own patterns, that we'll have to talk about uncomfortable things whenever necessary?" Emma looked at the extended hand, then at Daniel's face, and finally into her own heart. She knew she was at a crossroads, that her answer would define not just their future, but who she would choose to be from then on. She could retreat to the safety of distance, keep herself protected but also isolated, or she could take a leap of faith towards something that could be extraordinary or disastrous. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. "I want to try." The contact was electric, not just physically but emotionally. It was as if by physically accepting the connection, she was also accepting all the frightening and wonderful possibilities that came with it. Daniel intertwined his fingers with hers, gently, without pressure. "Then we make a pact," he said. "Whenever one of us feels we're slipping into old patterns, we speak immediately. Whenever we're afraid, we talk about that fear. Whenever we need space, we ask without feeling guilty. And we build this together, slowly, carefully, with respect for the wounds that we both carry." "It's a pact," agreed Emma. For the first time, since they had met, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. A future where love wasn't synonymous with danger, where intimacy wasn't synonymous with loss of identity, where she could be completely herself and still belong to someone. That night, they didn't make love in the traditional physical sense. But there was an intimacy between them that transcended the physical. The intimacy of two people who consciously decide to trust each other despite all the reasons they have not to trust. It was the kind of intimacy that could only exist between people who had looked directly at their deepest fears and chosen love anyway. When Emma left that night, she knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. There was no more pretending that Daniel was just a friend, no more denying that what they felt for each other was deep and transformative. Now they would have to learn how to navigate this new reality together, like two wounded people trying to create something beautiful from their fragments. The months that followed the mutual declaration of love brought an entirely new phase to Emma and Daniel's relationship. They began to explore physical intimacy gradually and carefully, always following Emma's pace, always with constant communication about boundaries and comfort. It was as if they were relearning what it meant to be physical with someone, discovering that touch could be a form of communication, not just desire. Emma discovered that her body was capable of responses she had never imagined possible. Under Daniel's careful and patient hands, she learned that pleasure didn't need to come accompanied by fear, that physical vulnerability could coexist with emotional safety. They spent weeks just kissing, weeks just exploring touch through clothing, weeks learning each other's sounds and reactions before taking any next step. When they finally made love for the first time, it was on a December night, with rain softly falling on the windows of Daniel's house. It wasn't perfect. Emma had moments of panic that needed to be worked through with patience and care, and Daniel had to fight against control impulses that still occasionally emerged. But it was real. It was honest. It was a connection between two people who had consciously chosen to trust each other with their deepest vulnerabilities. However, the happiness Emma was experiencing was shaken when, 3 months after they had become actual lovers, she began receiving anonymous letters. The first arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered directly to the library without an identified sender. It was a common envelope, with her name typed on a label, but when Emma opened it, she found old newspaper clippings pasted on a sheet of white paper. The clippings were about the death of a woman named Caroline Matthews, found dead in her apartment in Mount Pleasant exactly 15 years ago. The report mentioned that the police were investigating the death as a possible suicide, but that there were unclear circumstances involving an abusive relationship. One of the clippings included a photo of the victim, a beautiful woman with dark hair, with eyes that Emma immediately recognized as carrying the same type of deep sadness that she herself had carried for years. Emma was disturbed, but initially tried to rationalize that it could be coincidence. Perhaps someone had discovered about her relationship with Daniel and was trying to cause trouble. She kept the letter without mentioning anything to him, not wanting to create unnecessary drama. But when the second letter arrived a week later, she knew she could no longer ignore it. The second letter contained more clippings, these more specific and disturbing. There was a report about how Caroline had been found by neighbors after several days, an interview with a friend, who mentioned that Caroline had become unrecognizable in the last months of her life, isolated and dependent on a controlling boyfriend. But what shocked Emma most was a smaller clipping, almost lost among the others, which mentioned that Caroline was pregnant when she died. Daniel had never mentioned a pregnancy. Emma realized that, despite all the honesty they had built, there were still aspects of Caroline's story that he hadn't shared. This left her deeply uncomfortable, not just because of the omission, but because Emma herself had recently discovered that she was also pregnant. The discovery of the pregnancy had happened the week before, and Emma was still processing how she felt about it. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Terrifying because it meant a completely new vulnerability, wonderful because it was concrete proof that her body was capable of creating life, not just carrying trauma. She had planned to tell Daniel that week, but now with the revelations about Caroline, she no longer knew how to approach the subject. The third letter arrived just 3 days after the second, and this was the most disturbing of all. It contained a copy of a death certificate that Emma couldn't understand how someone had obtained, showing that Caroline had died from medication intoxication, but it also included handwritten notes in the margins suggesting that the police investigation had been abruptly interrupted due to political and financial influence. At the end of the letter, there was a message typed in capital letters: "He will do the same thing to you. Caroline was also pregnant. Run while you still can." Emma read the message several times, her hands visibly trembling. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything as the work of someone with ulterior motives. But another part, the part that had learned to distrust men for very real reasons, began to question everything she thought she knew about Daniel. That night, when Daniel arrived at her apartment for dinner, Emma was visibly tense. He immediately noticed that something was wrong, but when he asked, she said only that she had a headache. During dinner, Emma observed Daniel with new eyes, looking for signs of manipulation or control that she might have missed before. Was he being too careful? Was his patience genuine or calculated? Did his gentleness come from love or from the need to maintain control? "Emma, are you sure you're okay?" asked Daniel when she remained silent during most of the meal. "You seem worried about something." For a moment, Emma almost told him about the letters, almost directly asked about Caroline's pregnancy, but something made her hesitate. If the letters were right about him being dangerous, confronting him directly could be a mistake. If they were wrong, she would be destroying the trust they had built based on malicious rumors. "I'm just tired," she lied. "A lot of work at the library." Daniel didn't seem completely convinced, but he didn't insist. After dinner, when he suggested that he stay to sleep, Emma said she preferred to sleep alone, that she needed space to think about some things. He accepted without questioning, but Emma saw a shadow of concern cross his face. After Daniel left, Emma spent the night awake, looking alternately at the anonymous letters and at the positive pregnancy test she had kept in the drawer of her bedside table. Two realities collided in her mind, that of the careful and respectful man she had learned to love, and that of the potentially dangerous man described in the letters. How could she know which was the truth? How could she protect herself and the baby she was carrying without destroying something that could be genuinely good? For the first time in months, Emma felt the old fear returning. Not the generalized fear of men that had tormented her for years, but a specific and directed fear. What if she had made the same mistake as Caroline? What if she had confused skillful manipulation with true love? What if Daniel was really dangerous, but she had been too blind to see the signs? The next morning, Emma made a decision that frightened her more than anything she had done. She decided to investigate on her own. She used her contacts at the library to access old newspaper archives, looked for public information about Caroline's death, tried to find clues that would confirm or deny the accusations in the letters. She needed to know the truth, not just about Daniel, but about herself. She needed to know if she had been naive in trusting him, or if she was being paranoid in questioning that trust. But what Emma didn't know was that her investigations hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone was watching, waiting to see how she would react to the revelations about Caroline. And this person had their own plans for Emma and Daniel, plans that involved much more than just anonymous letters. The truth Emma was looking for was more complicated than she imagined, and the consequences of discovering it would be greater than she was prepared to face. The discovery of the truth came from a source Emma would never have expected. It was Bethany, her friend from the library, who brought the answers she had been desperately seeking. On a Thursday afternoon, when Emma was particularly tense and distracted, Bethany approached with a concerned expression and a folder in her hands. "Emma, I need to tell you something," said Bethany, closing the door of the archive where they worked. "I know you've been strange lately, and I think I know why. I received a very weird call yesterday, someone asking about you and about Daniel Fallon. The person didn't identify themselves, but said they were concerned about your safety and wanted to know if you had mentioned receiving threats." Emma felt her blood freeze. "What kind of call?" "A woman, young voice, but speaking as if she knew you well. When I asked who it was, she hung up." Bethany opened the folder and showed some printouts. "I decided to investigate on my own and discovered interesting things about Caroline Matthews." Emma took the papers with trembling hands. They were certificates, reports, but also documents that she hadn't been able to access on her own. "How did you get this?" "I have a cousin who works in the police department. I asked him to discreetly check the Caroline case." Bethany sat beside Emma. "The story isn't quite as it appears in the reports you must have seen." Emma quickly read the documents. Caroline Matthews had indeed died 15 years ago, but the details were different from what the anonymous letters suggested. "According to the complete police report," explained Bethany, "Caroline suffered from severe bipolar disorder and had attempted suicide other times, long before meeting Daniel. The investigation was closed because there was no evidence of crime. And yes, she was pregnant, but the relationship with Daniel had ended 3 months before her death." "Ended?" Emma looked surprised. "The letters said—" "The letters are lying, Emma, or at least greatly distorting the truth." Bethany showed another document. Daniel had distanced himself from her at the request of Caroline's own parents, who realized that the relationship was becoming unhealthy, but on her part, not his. Caroline was obsessed, possessive. She threatened to kill herself whenever he tried to create healthy boundaries. Emma felt as if the floor was moving beneath her feet. So he didn't kill her, didn't manipulate her to death, didn't use influence to cover up a crime. In fact, according to the records, he paid for years of psychiatric treatment for her. Even after the relationship ended, he tried to help her in every way possible, maintaining distance as the doctors recommended. "But then who is sending the letters?" asked Emma, confused. Bethany hesitated before answering. "This is the most disturbing part. I discovered that Caroline had a younger sister, Megan Matthews. She never accepted that Caroline had mental problems, always blamed Daniel for the death. And I discovered one more thing." Bethany paused dramatically. "Megan works for the cleaning company that maintains the library. She has access to the building, knows your routine, knows where you work." Emma felt nausea rise in her throat. I think she's trying to repeat with you what she believes Daniel did to Caroline. She wants to scare you, make you distrust him, maybe even push you into a situation of despair." Bethany held Emma's hand. "Emma, you need to tell all this to Daniel and to the police. This woman is stalking both of you." That night, Emma finally had the conversation she had been avoiding for weeks. When Daniel arrived at her apartment, she had all the letters spread on the living room table, along with the documents Bethany had obtained. "We need to talk," she said, voice firmer than it had been in the last few days. Daniel saw the letters and his face immediately paled. "Where did these come from?" Emma told him everything, about the letters, about her suspicions, about the investigation she had done, about the discovery of Megan. When she finished, Daniel was sitting on the edge of the sofa, head in his hands. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" he asked, voice heavy with pain. "Because I was afraid," admitted Emma. "I was afraid that the letters were right, that I had made the same mistake as Caroline." Daniel raised his head and looked at her directly. "And now? Are you still afraid?" Emma thought carefully before responding. "Not of you. I'm afraid of Megan. I'm afraid of what she might do, but mostly—" She took a deep breath. "Mostly I'm afraid of how I'm going to tell you that I'm pregnant after all this confusion with Caroline, also having been pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel looked at her as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "You're pregnant. 2 months." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. "And I'm terrified, Daniel. Terrified that this will change. Everything between us. Terrified that you'll feel pressured. Terrified that Megan will use this against us somehow." Daniel rose slowly and approached her. "May I hug you?" he asked, as he always did before any physical contact. When Emma nodded, he enveloped her in a careful embrace, as if she were made of crystal. "Emma, you're giving me the greatest gift I could imagine. A family. A chance to be the father I never had, to raise a child with love and respect." "Aren't you afraid?" she asked, burying her face in his chest. "Terrified," admitted Daniel. "But not of forming a family with you. I'm afraid of not being good enough, of repeating my parents' mistakes, of not being able to protect both of you from people like Megan. But I want to try, Emma. I want to build something beautiful and healthy with you." In the days that followed, they took practical measures to deal with the situation. They filed a police report about the harassment, hired a lawyer to legally deal with Megan, and Daniel hired discreet security to protect Emma. Megan was confronted and confessed to having sent the letters, justifying her actions as justice for Caroline's death. She was legally obligated to stop the harassment and keep away from them, but the resolution of the external problem allowed Emma and Daniel to finally focus on what really mattered, the future they were building together. They began couples therapy to ensure they would have healthy tools to deal with conflicts and challenges. Emma continued individual therapy to process old traumas that the pregnancy was bringing to the surface. Daniel intensified his own therapeutic work to prepare for fatherhood. 6 months later, on a sunny January afternoon, Emma gave birth to a girl they named Faith. When Daniel held his daughter for the first time, with tears streaming down his eye, Emma knew they had managed to break the cycles of pain that both carried. This child would grow up knowing only healthy love, respectful boundaries, and the security of parents who had consciously chosen to heal their wounds before transmitting them. A year later, in a small and intimate ceremony on Sullivan's Island beach, Emma and Daniel got married. It wasn't a traditional wedding. It was a celebration of two people who had found a unique and healthy way to love each other, who had proven that intimacy can exist without invasion, that love can be built slowly, with care and mutual respect. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, Emma looked at Daniel holding Faith in his arms and felt a deep gratitude for having had the courage to trust. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had taken the fragments of their broken lives and built something beautiful, something that honored both the wounds they carried and the love they had discovered. And when Emma looked at the Charleston Sea that day, she knew she was finally home. Not just geographically, but emotionally. At home with herself, at home with Daniel, at home with the family they had created together. She had found something she never thought possible. A love that healed instead of hurt, that liberated instead of imprisoning, that grew instead of diminishing with time. The ending wasn't perfect because real life never is. They still had difficult days. They still needed to constantly work to maintain healthy patterns. They still faced the occasional echoes of old traumas. But they had something that made everything possible. The daily choice to love each other with honesty, patience, and